Call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to meeting number 134. Government of OGGO, of course, the mighty OGGO. We have with us Global Affairs today. I understand Mr. Cousineau will do the opening statement. You have 5 minutes, please. Go ahead. Just before we start, everyone, just a reminder, keep your, especially for our witnesses, keep your headphones away from your mics, please, so that we can protect the hearing of our very valued interpreters. We will take a 5 to 10 minute break in the middle of the meeting to award a break for our, afford a break for our witnesses. We will go ahead with you. You have the floor for 5 minutes, Mr. Cousineau. Go ahead, please, sir.
Bon matin, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about the new official residence of Canada in New York, which the government recently purchased. I am pleased to explain the reasons for this purchase, the significant financial savings we have made, and the operational benefits offered by this new residence. The Consulate General in New York is one of Global Affairs Canada's most important missions. Not only does it provide essential services to approximately 300,000 Canadians residing in the area and to thousands of Canadians visiting each year, but it also plays a key role in protecting and promoting Canada's interests in trade and investment. In particular, the consulate supports our operations in a city that is not only the financial capital of our most important trading partner, but also of the entire world. It covers a vast territory of 5 states that together represent more than $200 billion in bilateral trade each year.
Residence in New York City is more than just a place of residence. It is an essential venue for hosting key interlocutors in smaller, more personal settings. Federal, provincial, and territorial representatives frequently use the space to engage with partners and advance Canada's interests. While this residence and other like it are used as living quarters by our heads of mission, their primary function is as a government worksite, where important diplomatic events and business meetings are conducted. Over the past 2 years alone, more than 50 official functions have been hosted at the residence, including business and networking events, as well as roundtable discussion, each providing a unique opportunity to engage with local leaders on issues that matters to Canadians. Affaires Mondiales Canada est le gardien.
Global Affairs Canada is the custodian of the Government of Canada's diplomatic and consular properties abroad. As such, we are responsible for the acquisition, maintenance, and disposal of Canada's office spaces, official residences, and staff housing abroad.
Comply with Treasury Board policies and Global Affairs internal guidelines to ensure transparency and value for money. The replacement of the official residence in New York was carefully planned and executed. It represents up to $7.4 million in net present value saving for Canadians. An aging asset is being replaced with a well-located, smaller, and more cost-effective property, positioning Canada to meet both current and future needs. The previous residence at 12E 550 Park Avenue was acquired in 1961 and was extensively used. The building is now over 100 years old. Concerns about the condition of the current residence were first raised actually in 2014. In 2017, a building condition report indicated that many systems were nearing the end of their life expectancy, estimating a midlife refit in the early 2020s at today's cost of up to $2.6 million. À la suite d'une analyse détaillée des options et d'un
Following a detailed analysis of options and a governance review, Global Affairs Canada, with the help of a local real estate specialist, evaluated 21 properties in 7 neighborhoods in New York, which is one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. After careful consideration, Global Affairs Canada opted for the property located at 111 West 57th Street.
Recently renovated property is situated in the heritage portion of a building in Midtown, contrary to previous reports suggesting that it was in a skyscraper. It is conveniently located near our office and other international organizations. The apartment is smaller than the previous property, more efficient and cost-effective, and it was purchased at a price recently reduced. Finally, the current official residence is now listed on the market. It was listed at $3.9 million higher than what was paid for the new residence. So we're very proud of this replacement transaction that not only promises substantial one-time saving for Canadians, but also avoid the $2.6 million in renovation costs and deliver $115,000 in ongoing annual saving on operational fees, cutting expenses in half, all in a real estate market that has consistently shown an annual return on investment increase. I look forward to addressing your question and providing further details on the rationale behind this purchase, the expected benefits for Canadians, and the financial consideration involved. Our goal is to ensure transparency and accountability in this matter, and we're here today to provide any information that you may require. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll start our 6-minute rounds with Mr. Barrett. Go ahead, please, sir.
So we're here today in the context in Canada of a cost of living crisis. We have 1 in 4 Canadians saying that they're going to be using food banks this fall. We know that rent prices have doubled, mortgage prices have doubled, and the Prime Minister's media buddy, who's making a very healthy salary by any measure compared to Canadian salaries, is getting a $9 million condo for his use as a residence. I know you said that its primary purpose was as a workspace, but if it's clocking on average about 2 business functions per month, and he's sleeping there 30 times per month, it sounds like its primary purpose is as a residence. Who signed off on the decision, sir? The most senior person who signed off? Just the name, please.
Mr. Chair, the transaction was signed by the Deputy Head of Mission based on a written delegation from the Director General responsible for real property planning and stewardship.
Who is the Director General?
The Director General is part of our real property team and who was supported by the governance and the process that was reviewed.
And the DG's name is?
And the DG's name is Frank Uzimbe.
And the deputy head of, and it was the deputy head of mission who had the delegated authority, and who's the deputy head of mission at the time?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to clarify that the mission actually are not part of the approval process or the decision making. The mission, the DHOM, was actually had the authority from headquarters, the DG, who had the authority to sign that transaction, which is understandable.
The name, sir?
Rob McCubbin.
Perfect.
Yeah.
In 2018, the Office of the Consul General and the Embassy to the United Nations moved into a joint workspace, which primary purpose is work, near Grand Central Station in New York City. So that facility has an executive dining room, if I understand correctly, and a reception space for up to 150 people. Is that correct? Just a yes or no, because I have a substantive question.
Mr. Chair, yes, the environment has an area that can accommodate. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the full kitchen that would be required, which would drive us to actually have quite expensive costs for actually providing the food by a caterer.
Okay, so does Mr. Clark prepare the food himself at his apartment, or is there a caterer or a hired chef that does that?
Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer that question. I'll turn very quickly to the DG.
I think we know the answer is that there are third-party costs associated with the food preparation, irrespective of where it happens. My substantive question is, why is the executive space that was purpose-built in 2018 for use by the Consul General and use by Canada's ambassador to the United Nations not sufficient, and that we had to incur millions of dollars of extra expenses that are going to be financed through the taxes of Canadians who are struggling to survive in the form of a $9 million penthouse on Billionaires Row in New York City for Justin Trudeau's media buddy? Why couldn't we use the space that was purpose-built instead of getting this luxurious location that's primary purpose is just for Mr. Clark's lodgings?
Mr. Chair, I'll welcome this question where we can actually articulate the space requirement that we provide and the reason behind it. I'll turn very quickly to the ADM of real property that can articulate the need that are actually identified as we provide this kind of like space. So I'll turn to Mr. Robin Dubois that can articulate more details about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As in opening remarks, we said the official residence is served as a place of living, but also as a platform for representation. We do have representation space at the consulate that is now amalgamated with the mission to the United States nation. We did that in 2018 to create savings and synergies. There is representational space in the office, but it doesn't allow for the kind of activities and representation that the official residence would. The new official residence has been acquired. It is smaller. It can accommodate smaller.
Thanks very much. We heard all of that information already. That was it took you a minute to not offer us any new information. We had previous representatives in the space. I think now Senator Pamela Wallin occupied the previous residence, identified it as sufficient. The $1.8 million estimate for renovations of the old residence suddenly became insufficient in 2023, which was right around the time that that Mr. Clark was the new head of mission, or the new consul general there. What happened that got the ball rolling there? Was it Mr. Clark that initiated the request? And if it was not Mr. Clark, who was it?
Mr. Chair, I welcome this question. I'd like to start by saying that there was no influence from Mr. Clark. He was not involved in the consultation or decision process.
Okay. So would you be able to table all correspondence on the subject of the new residence, or the transition to a discussion on a new residence instead of renovations?
Mr. Chair, as explained, we have a governance that's actually managed by headquarters, and we'd be pleased to actually table what the whole process is and how we got to
the correspondence, sir. You'll table the correspondence?
Mr. Chair, I can look at what's available and get back to you on that.
Well, if there was correspondence, you'll table it?
Yeah, I'll look into
Perfect.
it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Baird. We'll go to you, Mr. Shawari, please, for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the officials. This is the time we were looking for since yesterday, when 99% of our questions were referred to you. So welcome. I'm going to really frame my line of questioning over the next 3 hours around 3 different themes. Number 1 is going to be really the imperative for the move, and why did the move have to take place. The theme number 2 I'm going to try to get a clearer understanding is around whether all the policies and procedures were followed and whether we really got value for our money. And the last theme I'm going to focus on is around really the importance of the mission. You touched on all those 3, but I'm going to try to break it down for Canadians like me who, are Tim Horton double users. So let's start with the imperative first. My understanding is that aside from the cost imperative and looking at some of the needs, there were some new regulations were introduced by the board of the now previous property that restricted the ability of the mission to be able to perform the duties that they need to provide for us to make sure that we manage over $200 billion of trade in one of the most important cities, as you said it, which covers a lot. So can you talk about the imperative from the point of view that, aside from the cost, really we're dealt a hand that we had to react? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This allows us to actually articulate how much of a smart investment this was, and how the process was sound following all the policy and well documented as well. What I'll do is I'll turn to Robin that can articulate what were the main reason why we had to move and what had evolved in the last couple of years. Robin.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. The imperative to move was based on several elements. The business case includes, as you mentioned, some restrictions that have been applied by the co-op board on the usage of the official residence. There was one element that was part of the decision. There was also the fact that the the unit was aging, and we had received report in 2017 that in the early 2020s there would be a need to refurbish or renovate the apartment, and that's the $2.6 million cost that was reported. And there was also another element that that was reported in the business case, that was since the introduction of the Accessible Canada Act in 2021, the apartment was not compliant with that act. So all of those elements led to a option analysis, and what we do in our investment management framework, we make sure that we look at the full life cycle analysis of all of the options. So in 2023, what happened is we launched these initiatives to look at what are the three options that are available to us and what would be the cost benefit of each of the three. The three elements would be renovate, put $2.6 million to renovate the actual unit, or replace it with a leased asset, or replace it with a Crown owned asset. And we really, when it all came down to cost at the end of the day, because we had the last option that was replaced to own was more beneficial, of course, in the long term. So the net present value was calculated on the three options, and we picked the third one, which became the favorite option because it was creating $7.4 million of savings over, putting $2.6 million in a renovation for a unit that was still not meeting all of our requirements.
So thank you. So that really covers the imperative from three different angles. The restriction that was put to the operation by the cooperative board, which plays an important role. Even if we refurbished by $2.8 million, we still had to rely on other venues to be able to execute some of the activities that we do. And also, it looks like based on what I'm hearing, is that the due diligence was done. Now, let's go back and talk about the importance of the mission. So why one of our colleagues yesterday suggested, why don't we move to New Jersey? Let me ask that question. Why wouldn't we move it to New Jersey?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. There's nobody better placed to actually answer that question than my colleague, DG of North America, to talk about the operations, so I will actually turn to him.
Thank you. So I think that all of the honorable members would appreciate the importance of the United States. There's no country in the world that is more important to Canada's economic and security interests. And within that country, New York is the economic center. It's also the global economic center for global capital markets, right? And so the committee will have heard the Assistant Comptroller of Canada yesterday say that all real property needs to serve a program need. In the case of the global affairs portfolio, those program needs include the trade and investment program, the public affairs program, and the program providing consular services to Canadians.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Allen. That is our time. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please.
Just as it was.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Now, you talked about savings of $7.4 million. Is that in Canadian or American dollars?
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais clarifier effectivement.
I'd like to clarify, Mr. Chair, that we're speaking of Canadian dollars here. Thank you. And over what span of time will that sum of money be saved? Is that per year? Or is it over the apartment's life cycle? Thank you for the question. That will enable us to clarify the net present value. There's the sale price of the current residence versus the purchase price of the new property. Then there's the cost of renovations that we will not be doing that is included in that sum. Then there are also the annual cost that will be saved. I mentioned the $115,000 in my opening remarks. That will be annual. Annual operational costs will be cut in half. If I understand correctly, the current residence, the one that is currently on the market, the HOA costs are approximately $13,000. Does that include municipal taxes or not? And this I'm asking in US dollars. Thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Robin for the answer, just to ensure we really are giving you the right numbers. That's a good question. I'd like to add to what my colleague Stéphane was saying. When we calculate the value, we are looking partly at the difference between the sales price and the purchase price, because we know that the difference is $3.9 million, and we're also considering future savings. Usual practice rather, is to take the savings over the next 20 years. I don't have the exact details right now, but the overall monthly costs, well, they're currently about $10,000 a year, $120,000 a year. The previous cost was higher, and that's where we came up with the calculation that we're giving you. So the $7.4 million sum contains some current amounts, but also some amounts from the next 20 years. And so over the next 20 years, is there a projection for the maintenance fees for this new property, maintenance costs? Because we know that lots of things don't last that long. So is there a projection for the maintenance costs for this property over that 20-year period? Is there a plan for that? Is this cost for possible maintenance and renovation included in the 20-year spending projections? Yes. Mr. Chair, I will answer the question, and then I will ask Robin to add. Now, we do have a rather complex plan, but I will ask Robin to give you more details specifically.
It's a good question, and it's yes, we take into account the a percentage for recapitalization. Oh, excusez, je vais passer au français. On prend un coût.
So yes, a percentage cost for asset recapitalization, and that's been included in the calculations. So in the net annual value of this project, we take the 4% industry standard for recapitalization of the asset during its life cycle. Thank you very much. I will now turn to Mr. McCubbing, the Deputy Consul General. I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit due to my advanced years to see the exact spelling of his name. Now, you are the new Deputy Consul General in New York?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm the Deputy Consul General in New York.
Et vous avez rencontré le nouveau consul?
You met with the new Consul General?
Yes, I work with the Consul General.
J'aimerais simplement avoir une...
Yes, now, I'm not familiar with everyone's bio, so I have a question. Regarding the Consul General, Mr. Clark, are we speaking of the journalist who was chosen to moderate the leaders' debate for the last Conservative Party leadership race?
Mr. Chair, Consul General Clark is a former broadcaster. I'm not 100% familiar with his complete work history, so I'm not sure if he moderated the previous Conservative debate.
Yeah, that is our time, I'm afraid. Mr. Bachrach, good morning. Good early morning to you. Over to you, sir, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I start, I'd just like to ask the clerk if my sound is okay. I understand there were some issues during the sound test, and I never had a chance to come back and confirm.
Yeah, we seem to be fine, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much to our witnesses. And as was remarked earlier, it's great to have folks from Global Affairs here who were more intimately involved in the acquisition we're discussing than some of our witnesses yesterday. And I wanted to start perhaps at a high level and talking a little bit about why this issue has come before the committee. And I think part of it is that the properties that are selected for consular use in cities like New York tend to be expensive properties. They tend to be in expensive parts of town, and the opulence and the ostentatiousness of those properties makes them, rightfully, I think, a target for questions about the appropriateness of those purchases. And at the same time, I think we all want to ensure that our consular staff and our diplomats have appropriate facilities for their important work. The apartment that we're talking about is located in a neighborhood that's known as Billionaires Row. And we're having this conversation at a time of historic wealth inequality and an affordability crisis that my colleagues have already mentioned. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're focusing in on this particular decision, because Global Affairs chose to buy an apartment on Billionaires Row in a neighborhood that has some of the most expensive real estate in the world. So my first question, probably to Mr. Cousineau, is whether in the decision-making process, the optics and the potential implications of buying a property on Billionaires Row at a time of historic wealth inequality, both in the United States and Canada, came up as a potential risk factor for Global Affairs.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. First, I'd like to say that we are looking at the heritage building that is in the Midtown district. As I said in my opening remark, this heritage building is an old building that was recently renovated. We are not in the skyscraper, which might have led to the branding that's being reported in the media. We're not in that building. Also, I'd like to reiterate that we have a process that actually looks at specific criteria to respond to the diplomatic needs, which are around location, security, and other criteria. I'd be pleased to turn to my colleague Robin, responsible for real property, who could articulate how we got to that decision of the 111 57th Street.
Thank you, Stéphane. Thanks for the question. What I will offer to the committee is that we have a set of guidelines and a real property manual that exists that has a chapter on how to select official residences. And that lays out basically what are the characteristics that we're looking, and also what kind of location that we would like to acquire. We pick that residence there. And as I said in my previous intervention, it's a place of work when we hold meetings, and it's also a place where the Consul General will live. So we have two sets of criteria that we need to apply here. It's criteria for a good location to be able to deliver the program that we have, the program being the representation functions that we need to exercise abroad. So we basically locate the official residences in location where contacts are accessible, where other like-minded countries are located, nearby our office as well for various reasons. And we have a set of criteria for the selection of the official residence for the living space. In this particular case, what happened is we looked with the real estate broker at 21 properties that are located in 7
If I could interrupt you, sir.
Yes, sir.
The original question, sometimes the original question gets lost a little bit in the explanation. The original question was whether the optics and the perception that might be associated with purchasing a property in an area colloquially known as Billionaire's Row, was ever discussed as a risk factor by Global Affairs during the purchase decision?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. During the process, we applied all of the factors and basically found that place around in the 7 neighborhood that we visited and saw that it was considerably cheaper or less expensive to be located in Midtown, which is the location where we purchased. And the question of Billionaire Row did not surface at that time because we were looking at the characteristic, location, and functionality of the property.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, here in Canada, certainly my colleagues and myself are working very hard to implement policies that promote equality, that create opportunity for working people, that create solid social programs that lift people up, and address some of the gross inequalities that we see in places like the United States and certainly to some degree in our own country. Now, was it ever discussed by Global Affairs that purchasing a consular property in a neighborhood that was a little less ostentatious might be more consistent with some of those goals that we've been pursuing as a country over the past number of years?
I'm going to interrupt there. We're out of time, but perhaps we can get back to that in the next round, or perhaps you can provide that to us in writing. Mrs. Block for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start off my round of questioning with a couple of requests. Yesterday, in our deliberations with TBS and PSPC, I had asked for a list of the real property that GAC is the custodian for, and she advised me that I needed to put that request to you, so I'm asking if you could table that list of real property holdings with this committee.
Mr. Chair, it will be our pleasure to actually provide that list.
Thank you. As well, based on the information we received yesterday, could you table with the committee the life cycle costing for keeping the current residence and repairing it, and for the purchase of a new residence, including the sale of the current residence?
Mr. Chair, as explained, part of the process was looking at this option analysis and the financial implication for the 3 options. So we will be pleased to actually provide the analysis that was on. Yep.
Thank you very much. In your search for a new residence, and I'm probably following up on a similar line of questioning to the former member, in your search for a new residence, did you consider the purchase of a residence away from Manhattan in a more cost-effective neighborhood?
Mr. Chair, I welcome that question. There are criteria that we looked at, as mentioned, and as it was pointed out, New York is a very expensive market. I just wanted to refer to some example of other countries. UK, for example, 5 years ago bought something that's valued today at $21 million. So it is an expensive market, whatever district that you're going to be looking at.
Right, but
now,
surely there are more cost-effective neighborhoods than, as my colleague referenced, Billionaire Row.
And this is bringing me back, Mr. Chair, to what are the actual criteria that we have to look when we actually establish the location and we do this analysis. I'll turn to Robin that can articulate what are those criteria and why is it important to be in the right location.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the question is about the location on Manhattan, and that's the first thing we ask when we select a location or a property is its location to be able to deliver the program needs. And in this case, all of the G7 and G20 countries that have either an office or an official residence on Manhattan Island, and it made sense from a program perspective for proximity to be located on that in the same area. Now, the question about where in Manhattan, the 21 properties that we visited in 7 different neighborhoods, we picked the cheapest, or one of the cheapest on the list that was available per square meter, and that's the one that was located in Midtown that we acquired.
So perhaps you could provide for us a more detailed explanation of what program requirements dictated this need. You've mentioned the need to be co-located, but what other program requirements are taken into consideration in order to be located on the south end of Central Park in Manhattan?
Mr. Chair, I welcome again the question. We do have a framework that includes all these criteria that we're making allusion to. We have a manual that includes those criteria as well.
Can you table that?
And we could, Mr. Chair, we would be pleased to share that manual that already exists.
So I guess my next question would be, do you believe that purchasing a residence in a more cost-effective area would have an impact on Canada-U.S. trade or diplomatic relations?
Mr. Chair, as mentioned in my opening remark, the investment that we've done was a long-term value with a net present of $7.4 million, and that's after doing the option analysis, looking at multiple properties, going for a space that had reduced and was offering a very cost-effective solution. So we believe that purchase was a very good investment for Canadians.
So I guess my question was more along the lines of perhaps a comment that was out on a news broadcast where it was suggested that if Canada wanted to play in the big leagues, we needed to spend money. Do you think that if we don't spend this kind of money, we won't be taken seriously by the United States?
Very brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, as the stewardship responsible for the infrastructure around the globe, our main goal is to ensure stewardship and value for money. So we're looking always at that aspect.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. So I've got a kind of questions that are all over the place, so I'll try to keep them coherent here. The first one, so there's a piece about, it's the savings year over year, the reduce of ongoing maintenance costs. Can you speak to what the maintenance costs were for the previous residents in comparison to what we're expecting for the new residents?
Once again, welcome the question. I will turn to my colleague Robin that can talk about this information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the, there's different kind of costs that are emerging from real property that we have. You have the ongoing real property costs like condo fees and other elements. There's also regular maintenance that needs to be done on the asset, and there's also recapitalization of the asset that comes on a cyclical basis. So we know that the new official residence has just been renovated, so the investment in maintaining it will be minimum. And in comparing with the old residence, now we're saving 50% or $10,000 a month on ongoing monthly fees. So that's what I could offer the committee as details.
Thank you very much. And how about the property taxes? Is the current residence, will it be lower than the previous?
Question. Yes, all taxes are included in the ongoing cost that we've reported.
Okay, perfect. And Mr. Cousineau noted that there were $2.6 million in estimated renovation costs for the previous residence. And I note that the previous residence is being readied for sale, so not yet sold. Are there any concerns around not having done that maintenance for getting kind of the best value for money in the sale of that residence?
Mr. Chair, welcome the question. In fact, the maintenance has always been done. That's our responsibility. What we were talking about here is like there are systems that are coming to the end of their life. You could think about your water heater. You could think about electricity. So it's not that maintenance hasn't been done. So we are very confident that the sale will be going well. Thank you.
Okay, that would be my next question was, is there a confidence that in this current market that we're going to get kind of that asking price that will hopefully balance out this cost-benefit analysis that we're trying to portray today?
The question, as it was mentioned before, we actually have work with a real estate agent that knows that market very well. We've been working very closely. I'll talk to Robin maybe about what we've learned from that market and what we expect.
Thank you. Just briefly, I know that we work with a very experienced real estate broker that we hired through a competitive process, and we followed the advice of the real estate agent when we put the asset in the firm's hand for sale, and it's being listed at the price that reflect the current condition of the asset, and also at a price that was assessed by our real estate agent according to comparables in the area.
Excellent. So one of my questions is going to be, why go to a third-party appraiser, or perhaps even the conversation about a broker? Can you speak to why it's important to have that kind of expertise on the ground in making some of these decisions?
Absolutely. It's important to have a third-party assessment of our assets. We do it. That asset has been assessed twice. We got an update a couple of weeks ago, just before we put it on the market, to reassure that we had a good appreciation of the fair value of the asset. And it's also mandated by policy that we do it, but we do it as a good matter, of course, because it's important for us to know what is the value of the assets we have in our hands before putting it on the market.
Excellent, thank you. And just for anyone who might be curious, was the Consul General, Tom Clark, involved in the decision of purchasing a new official residence?
Mr. Chair, welcome the question. As mentioned, this was a smart acquisition. This was actually a process that was sound, policy compliant, well documented, and exempt from any influence, including from Mr. Clark. Thank you.
Thank you. And how many years do you expect the residents to serve the current Consul General, or the office itself, actually?
Mr. Chair, I'll turn to Robin just to ensure to have the right number of years.
Well, the investment is done on the very long term. I mean, the last official residence, we've owned it since 1961, and this one, there's no indication that we're going to be disposing of it anytime soon. So I would say it's going to serve for its lifetime, which is estimated to between 55 and 60 years.
Thanks very much. We'll go to back to Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Now, we know that the New York real estate market can be very competitive, although there has been a decrease in the market due to the conditions we're all familiar with. The cost being asked today is under $10 million US, but this is a luxury property. But it's below the threshold of what's considered for a luxury property, so the sale can be done quickly. It can be done over 198 days according to the usual standards. So when do you think you might be able to sell the property? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I don't wish to speculate on the amount of time it might take to sell the unit. It depends on market fluctuations, but what I can say is that we have worked with an expert real estate agent in order to identify a competitive price. As you know, we have also worked with PSPC to evaluate and assess the residence and the price. Without divulging confidential information, I will say that I believe the price is well aligned, and I would just ask Albert if he has anything to add. Well, that's a good question. As my colleague said, we can't really control how quickly the unit will be sold. But what I can say is that, as you yourself said, the New York market is very dynamic. The real estate agent assessed comparable sales in the neighborhood recently. He's very motivated and very confident that this sale will be able to move forward quite quickly. However, this is outside our control. Thank you. Now, very quickly, one of the reasons that the apartment is being switched is that in 2021, there was talk of $2.6 million in repairs that were not done because of the pandemic. But the building in which the new apartment was just bought was completed in 2021. So clearly it was possible to carry out renovations in 2021 because buildings were being constructed like this one. So could you further explain why it wasn't possible to complete those renovations in 2021 as the pandemic restrictions were decreasing? Can you give me any other reasons or factors that had to do with those renovations not happening?
Time for a response.
Really clear.
So perhaps, Mr. Cousineau, you can commit to put that in writing to us, or perhaps we can get back in the next 2 hours. Mr. Bachrach, go ahead, please, for 2.5.
Mr. Chair, I think that's an excellent question. So perhaps I'll re-ask it on behalf of my colleague, Ms. Vignola, and ask why those renovations were completed in 2021.
Once again, welcome. The question, indeed, that there was analysis that actually, with the inflation that was happening, that has increased the cost of those renovations. As you recall, there was something particular happening in those times, which was COVID. I will quickly turn to Robin to articulate what had changed and what were the challenge when this renovation that we wanted to do, essentially.
Thank you for the opportunity. There were two elements that were playing in that file that was delaying it. The pandemic, of course, had a tremendous impact on all of our projects abroad, and that was one thing. But also, our ability to secure the permits from the various authorities, co-op, and municipalities were taking time. So this led to the delay that brought us to reassessing the renovation and finding out that the costs were escalating, which triggered the full option analysis.
And that's what led to the decision to purchase the new apartment at a different address.
Yes.
Okay. Going up a level to a bit of a more general question, I think most Canadians would want us to have representation in New York that is at least on par with our peer countries, given that the United States is our most important trade relationship and shares the longest undefended border in the world. Could you talk a little bit about how Canada compares to other G7 countries in terms of consular properties in New York? Where do we stack up amongst that group of countries with regard specifically to the value and location of real estate?
A brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, welcome to the question. I've shared one example, which was UK, where they bought something like 5 years ago, actually had hit the media at $21.5 million. We've looked at a couple of other countries also to compare. I would say that we're one of the lowest one, if it's not the lowest cost of purchase when we compare it to, relatively to other countries. New Zealand at 11 million 11 years ago, so you can imagine the cost today. 35 million for Italy. Even Danish, that's not G7, at $9 million. Thank you.
Sir. Mr. Brock, please, for 5 minutes.
The acquisition of this extravagant condo on Billionaires Row has garnered a lot of attention across this country, as well as with media. I'm curious as to the consultations that the four of you have had prior to today's appearance with Minister Joly.
Mr. Chair, we have followed the governance and process according to our delegation.
It's not the question, sir. It's not the question. I have limited time. I'm interested in your discussions with Minister Joly in relation to your appearance. Did it happen?
Mr. Chair, no, there was no interaction with Mr.
Did you receive any emails from Minister Joly with respect to your appearance?
Mr. Chair, no, we haven't received any emails.
Has she weighed in on the controversy surrounding the acquisition of this property?
Mr. Chair, the minister was not involved in this
Thank you.
process.
Was she briefed by you?
Mr. Chair, We actually have brief, as per normal process, the Minister's
Was she
office.
briefed on the acquisition of this property?
Mr. Chair, she was informed, the Chief of Staff was informed in June 2024.
I'm going to push back on some of the narrative that has been circulated among Canadians. You're quoted, your department is quoted as follows: considering the high renovation costs for the current residents and value of the property, GAC has recommended a relocation to a new, smaller, more suitable, and more economical apartment. In addition to representing a savings opportunity of more than $2 million, it will also reduce ongoing maintenance costs, property taxes, support future program needs, and meet representational requirements. Now, at first blush, this may give the impression to Canadians that you're actually downsizing. And when Canadians think of the term downsizing, they think of perhaps raising a family, having an empty nest, and moving from a 4 to 5 bedroom home to a small 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom condo. But that's the furthest from the truth in relation to the acquisition of this property on Billionaires Row. In fact, the old property on Park Avenue was roughly 3,800 square feet, and you downsized, wait for it, to a whopping 3,600 square feet. The actual rooms have actually increased. The old property had 12 rooms. The new property has 14 rooms. So you're not giving the Canadians the full truth here. You're not being honest with them in terms of the actual blueprint. Now, I also want to talk about the operating costs. You keep talking about these savings. We're saving Canadians upwards to $115,000 per year. I've got the listings from both of these properties from a website called Street Easy. The old monthly maintenance cost, this is the common fees, this would be the taxes, is $13,147 US per month. The new property is not a savings at all. Taxes and common charges are actually $15,213. So $2,000 US per month more for this new property that's supposed to be saving Canadians value. You're misrepresenting the facts. You're not telling the truth to Canadians. So I want you to be aware of this, and I want you to comment on it, because you talk in broad strokes about these savings. When you dig down into this, there's no savings at all. Now let's talk about the utility costs. What currently are the utility costs on Park Avenue versus utility costs on 57th Street? Is there a savings?
Mr. Chair, welcome the question to clarify the costs. I will turn to my colleague.
I didn't need that, sir. That's a waste of time. If anyone knows the answer, please, Mr. Dubois, answer the question.
I don't have the cost of the utilities at the new place. We have not occupied it yet. But I have the total amount that is forecasted to spend on the ongoing basis per month.
Okay, and is that a savings over Park Avenue, or is it the same, or is it more?
It's a saving.
Savings.
Yes.
You'll table that for us?
We could.
You'll table the monthly utility costs for Park Avenue and the monthly utility costs for West 57th. Okay? Now, what else about the
Sorry, Mr. Brock, that is our time.
Thank you.
Mr. Baines, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. Has the GACA dealt with any cases similar to this case where residence or other real property was bought to replace one that was being sold?
Mr. Chair, we do have a lot of official residents around the globe. In hundreds of projects. I will turn to Robin, who might have more specific information about that.
Good question. As my colleague, Mr. Cousineau, was explaining, we basically report in the Federal Real Property Directory that we have 2,300 we're the custodian of 2,300 properties, and we do transactions on a regular basis every year. We transact for staff quarters, for official residences.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Do you look at, and your criteria to ensure that these are located in the right areas? Like, how do you determine which areas? I know that it's a lengthy analysis that you do, but typically one of the key pieces is that it should be located in areas where diplomatic relations occur, correct?
And the requirements change depending if it's residential for staff quarters, official residences for representation purposes, or chanceries that are office space. But we basically look at a set of criteria as you described there to select those locations.
And how many did you say there were? You said over 1,000?
Well, we have 2,300 assets abroad.
In how many different countries?
If I might intervene. So we have 182 mission in 112 countries, Mr. Chair.
And with respect to this specific property, who else? I think one of the colleagues began to sort of touch on the importance of the diplomatic relations and being in an area where, considering the difficult times that we are seeing now, that security, safety is of course paramount in some of these decisions. And not only that, we are also in a time where we need to continue to grow, whether it's economically and increase our defense efforts and all of these things. So how important are those things with the decision that was being made in New York?
I welcome again the question. Indeed, all those criteria that were actually mentioned are very important as part of our process. I could turn to Mark Allen that could speak of the value that it brings for us.
Thank you. No, the trade and investment driven by the consulate is directly linked to the economic security of Canadians. So I think people are aware of the critical minerals market right now is a very important one. So a number of investments in critical minerals can directly be traced back to events which were held at the consulate. This includes an investment of $1.5 billion in the Nemaska mine in Quebec, a lithium mine. I also mentioned that New York is the center of global financial markets. Two Japanese banks located there have invested $39 million in other Canadian nickel and lithium projects, again as a result of events that have been held in the residence. Thank you.
Can you continue to list more, please, if there's anything else that you can add?
I mean, those are some examples of some high impact investments. There have been 50 events, as has been noted in the last 2 years, a range of conferences and lunches and other events. Very frequently driving the trade program, right, and as well as the public affairs program. Another important function of the consulate is networking with political representatives in the United States, with governors' offices, with New York Assembly persons.
Thanks, Mr. Allen. We're out of time. We're now going to Mr. Genuis, please. Go ahead, sir. Are you muted, sir? We cannot hear you, Mr. Genuis.
Is that working now?
Yeah, it's working now. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I just remuted and unmuted, but anyways, following Mr. Brock's line of questioning, just to put a fine point on it, can you please provide to this committee in writing a detailed breakdown of monthly costs associated with both locations, and all costs, any taxes, any condo fees, any co-op fees, utilities. A clear breakdown for both locations, all the information you have. You'll be able to provide that to the committee within the usual timeline?
Mr. Chair, as already mentioned, we can provide the option analysis, which actually include the net present value, that it should be including all that information. I also would like to clarify that...
No, that's fine. It's my time. You're going to provide all that information that I requested in writing. Thank you. My next question is...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I thought there was a statement that was going to clarify what Mr. Jennis was asking, and I would like to hear it.
Well,
you can. I'm sorry. I'll address this, Mr. Longfield. You can hear it during your time, but this is Mr. Jennis's time, please. Thank you.
People who have been here for a long time have complete ignorance of the rules. Chair, how much time do I have left?
4 minutes.
Thank you.
Point of order. I don't appreciate the comment that Mr. Jennis just made to an honorable member.
Okay, excuse me.
Nonsense.
I'll declare, Mr. Longfield, that's not a point of order. Appreciate it, but we understand the sentiment. Mr. Jennis, continue with your time, please.
Thank you. Just to the witnesses, I do want to say I think it's pretty disingenuous to project cost savings based on a comparison of purchase price in one case with asking price in another. That's clearly an apples to orange comparison, maybe more precisely an apples to magic apples comparison. You've set an asking price for the old property at 550 Park Avenue, but that asking price is not the same as the appraised value. We heard that yesterday. My research team looked at other properties being sold at 550 Park Avenue. All of them have sold substantially below asking price if they were sold at all. In many cases, they were sold at reduced price. There was a reduced price, and then they were taken off the market and not sold. And just for your reference, we looked at units number 10, 2W, 17E, 11W, 12A, 16AE, and 6W, all cases where they were reduced in price and not sold, or they sold at a substantially reduced price below the asking price. So your fake math of asking price comparison to the purchase price is pretty thin. If you wanted to show that this was a good transaction, if you wanted to show that there were savings, I'd like to know why in the world didn't you just sell the existing property first before purchasing the new property? That would have given you a sense of what your actual comparison was in terms of numbers. Why did you wait to even list the old property until you purchased the new one?
Chair, I welcome the question. Let's remember that the residence is a place of work. So it's not just like a pure residence. So we actually needed business continuity. If we would have sold the actual residence, we would have actually have to lease another location so we ensure business continuity, which is why we didn't do that.
Sir, you have multiple different locations where you can hold events. So for an interim period of a few months, you could have used many other spaces in New York, the consulate itself, space that's available to the UN ambassador. You could have hosted other events in other locations. In fact, most of the hospitality expenses for Mr. Clark involve restaurants. You are frequently hosting events in restaurants. So that excuse isn't going to fool anyone either, sir. Why could you not at least secure a buyer for the old location before moving to the new location instead of coming to committee with this fake comparison of apples and oranges?
Mr. Chair, I will go back to the criteria that we've talked about when we select a location. It's about not only location, but security.
The question is, why didn't you sell first?
And business continuity to ensure also that it met the criteria for the location.
But there are so many other locations in New York where you could have events. Another question in the same vein. Is your analysis of numbers predicated on Park Avenue property selling by within a certain time frame? You told us about certain potential alleged savings. Is that predicated on it selling within a certain time frame?
Mr. Chair, welcome. The question, this saving that we have presented in our net present value is not tied to a specific sale of the current condo. Thank you.
Well, that doesn't make any sense then, because you have ongoing carrying costs associated with both properties for as long as you own them. Now, in the context of selling one property and purchasing another in New York, the government of Canada may have had to pay, but may have been exempt from the following: capital gains tax, the U.S. Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act, state and city transfer taxes, New York's mansion tax. Which of these taxes or costs did you have to pay, and which, if any, were you exempt from?
I'm afraid time has not been left for an answer, so we'll get back to it again, or perhaps you can commit to put that in writing to us. Mr. Longfield, welcome to OGGO. Now it's your turn. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's okay that we've just cut to the next speaker, since he wasn't being allowed to answer questions in the first place. But maybe I could go to the statement earlier about the life cycle of the building itself, looking at 55 to 60 years. To put that into context, I've visited many council offices in my role as Member of Parliament. One of them was the Council Office of India, and it was next door to the Leader of the Opposition's house, who was Andrew Scheer at the time. And the Consul General was Vikas Swarup, who was working with me and with the University of Guelph to facilitate the setting up of a Center for Indian Studies at the University of Guelph. And the University of Guelph has subsequently started that center, and also has appointed an interim chair for Indian Studies that's visiting from India. So the important work that goes in a council office is not strictly entertainment. There is some socializing, and it's a different venue where we talked about jazz that night as well, but we were really focused on creating a Center for Indian Studies at the University of Guelph. Since then, we've had a change in the Leader of the Opposition, and we've had a change in the Consul General from India. What's a normal time for a Consul General to occupy one of the residences that their government provides?
Mr. Chair, I welcome the question. I will actually turn to my colleague, DG of North America, Mark Allen, that can talk about these operations.
We've recently established set timeframes for diplomatic postings, and in the United States, it is 4 years.
Terrific. So, I mean, part of the arguments that the Conservatives is making is that this is a house that the Prime Minister is giving one of his buddies, one that was also a moderator at the Conservative Leadership Convention, which kind of disconnects. Is any staff involved, including the acting government lead at the consular office, is any staff involved in the selection of properties?
Mr. Chair, once again, I welcome the question. The process, the decision-making is all managed at HQ, and there's no influence by any other staff than the people responsible for the stewardship of the real property.
Great, thank you. And also, I know we will be getting some of this in writing, as was requested, but the cost savings that have been determined by the independent body, not a political organization that's giving us money as a Liberal government, the cost savings of a smaller location versus the location that we were occupying since the 60s. Could you maybe comment on, just in general, how there was a cost savings? I know we will be getting details.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I will turn to my colleague Robin, because indeed we have downsized, and there are going to be a definite saving that's going to be tied to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is about the cost savings, and of course, when you look at the cost of renovating and aging property, this is a cost that you're going to be not really recuperating, because you're only bringing an asset back to where it should have been, investing or putting down $2.6 million in this case. So that saving alone is quite significant. But if you look at the difference in prices as well, we're anticipating quite a substantial profit out of the transaction. So those are the two elements for savings, in addition to the ongoing savings that you mentioned.
Thank you. And one quick question on the future of diplomacy. The report that was tabled in the House about a year ago, how does this transaction match up with the study that was approved by the Senate as well as by the Parliamentary Committee, the House of Commons Committee?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. This investment actually very much aligned with the future of diplomacy, not only on the what we actually are going towards to in terms of like investment, but also on the how, the introduction of agility, effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and again, value for money.
Thanks very much. That is our time, sir. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. What I took from your remarks as well, Mr. Cousineau, is that one of the problems with the current location is that it is a co-op and that perhaps members of the homeowners association, this co-op association, may have been bothered about the fact that events were being held at this residence. I imagine that the situation has changed greatly over the last 60 years to cause this to be a problem. Is that not so? Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed, members of the board changed. And we have seen over the last few years is that the rules became more strict. Things became more delicate over the years. And that was indeed another factor, in addition to the cost and other factors that I mentioned. That's what led to us taking this decision. And so Canada's government was also part of this co-op, I imagine, and yet its voice didn't have much impact. Well, I'll just ask Robin to answer the question. But indeed, we're part of that group. So we're one of the votes. But it's a big building, so we're only one of the votes. Thank you. In New York, in Manhattan, there are 3 types of unit: co-ops, condos, and apartment buildings, each of which have their own ways of proceeding. But in this case, we have seen that there are no semi-detached residences. So is that a possible procedure? Is that possible that a government could own such a residence and manage it itself? Well, that's one possible way to look at the situation, but there are matters of security to consider. I would ask my colleague, Mr. Dubois, to answer. Yes, it's a good question. We're not against the idea of buying a semi-detached property. But the thing with these semi-detached properties is that they are both more costly because you have your own address and you're responsible for maintenance not only of the inside, but as well of the outer frame of the building. So it's often very costly. In addition, because it's usually at ground level, a semi-detached means that we need to take costly security measures. So it's difficult in general to opt for a semi-detached.
Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you very much, Chair. And, we've heard in previous testimony that Steinway Hall, which I believe is the heritage building that the new apartment is located in, is somewhat different from Steinway Tower. However, they're connected and associated. And I guess my first question is whether they share the same residential address.
Mr. Chair, the answer is simple. Yeah, actually, the annex, which is the skyscraper, was the new annex that was added later on, and it is the same address.
So Steinway Tower, Mr. Cousineau, has been a somewhat controversial building. I was reading in one report that according to the Manhattan District Attorney, the construction company that built Steinway Tower, Parkside Construction, and its affiliates stole more than $1.7 million in wages over 3 years from about 520 workers at the tower and 7 other high-rise buildings. And the company also hid nearly $42 million in wages from state insurance officials to avoid paying millions in workers' compensation premiums. Was Global Affairs aware of this controversy during the evaluation process? And was the controversy around the construction of Steinway Tower considered as a risk factor when it came to the perception and brand image that would come with locating Global Affairs operations at that address?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. Once again, as pointed out, there is the Steinway Tower and there is the Steinway Hall. So we're not staying in that Steiner Tower, sorry. Personally, I was not aware of this information.
Okay, so I can assume that it didn't, like it feels like a little bit of a, splitting hairs to distinguish between the tower and the hall, given that they're connected and they share the same residential address. I guess the question is whether it came up during discussions as a potential risk factor, particularly the message that it sends to working people that Global Affairs was willing to locate in a building with such a controversial history. And I take from your comments that that didn't come up in the discussions around the purchase.
Brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, again, our focus is on stewardship and value for money. We've looked at the Steinway Hall, and I couldn't speak about that information is being shared today. I was not aware.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barrett, please.
About the purchase before or after?
Mr. Chair, welcome to the question. The Minister's office was actually informed before the purchase.
Okay. And who in the Minister's office was informed?
Mr. Chair, following the delegation of authority, we actually communicated as per normal protocol, and we've informed the Minister's office, more precisely the Chief of Staff.
Okay. On what date was the Minister's Chief of Staff informed, and on what date was the sale finalized?
Mr. Chair, I'd have to go back to the chronology, but if my memory plays well, for the actual purchase, we've informed the, if you bear with me, the intent to purchase and sell in early June 2024.
That's when you informed the Minister?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the total cost, just the number, to make any fit-ups for the new residents?
Mr. Chair, in terms of fit-up costs, we don't have the precise detail financial information, but what I could say, it's probably around $100,000 to $150,000.
$150,000.
Yeah.
The shared space with the UN Embassy, how much was spent on that in 2018? I referenced it earlier, the meeting space.
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't have that information out of my hand, but I would be pleased to provide that information back to the.
So that was in 2018 that space was acquired. And is it rented or owned?
Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Dubois.
Mr. Dubois, rented or owned?
I would have to confirm.
Okay.
I don't have the information.
You don't know. It seems relevant to this because the rationale for purchasing the $9 million condo for Justin Trudeau's buddy on Billionaire Row is predicated on not having a kitchen at the facility that Global Affairs Canada, under the Trudeau government, acquired in 2018. And now here we are in 2024, and we've got to buy a $9 million condo because someone, Global Affairs Canada under Justin Trudeau, forgot to put a kitchen in. And I'm looking at the kitchen on the listing for the $9 million condo, and I'm quite curious about the square footage of this because it doesn't look like a commercial kitchen. And I'm just curious, yes or no, is it your contention that all food prep for events hosted at the official residence will be done on-site and not in a commercial kitchen? On-site or commercial kitchen?
Je ne peux pas répondre à cette question par oui ou par non, mais est-ce que la préparation de nourriture se fera sur les lieux ou dans une cuisine commerciale? Le chef de mission pourra prendre une décision là-dessus. Oui, j'aimerais interrompre très brièvement.
Yeah, I'm on English channel and French is coming all of a sudden.
It should be back now.
Okay. Can we just test this? Is it working now? got just over 2 minutes, Mr. Barrett.
The head of mission can decide. It seems foolish then to buy a $9 million condo because it has a kitchen that can accommodate these functions. That the office that you acquired in 2018, apparently you forgot to include a kitchen, and but he still might have a commercial kitchen prepare the food and hosts any number of events at restaurants. Could you table for the committee, please, Mr. Cousineau, the number of functions that Mr. Clark has expensed at restaurants since his time as CG? Can you table that for the committee?
Mr. Chair, I can certainly look at the information that's available in that context and provide it to the table.
Okay, that's great. How many official functions has Ambassador Ray hosted at his residence?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to actually turn to Mark Allen, responsible for the operation.
Mr. Allen, just the number, please. How many events?
I'm afraid I don't have the number for Mr. Ray.
Can you table it with the committee, please?
We certainly will.
This is it's pretty remarkable. Mr. Allen, I want to ask you a quick question. Is it your contention that had those meetings that occurred at the official residence with Mr. Clark, had they happened at the office of the Consul General and not in his residence, that Canada would not have succeeded in those trade negotiations or in those acquisitions? Is that what your statement is?
I can't speak about those specific events. I think the intimacy and the personal nature of an official residence for a head of a Canadian mission does add to their general toolkit.
Right. So if that was the case, wouldn't it make sense then in 2018 to have acquired a joint space that achieved that for both the UN, our UN rep, and for the CG instead of buying separate facilities for that purpose?
Again, I think having multiple options for different types of event is very important.
When you're playing with other people's money, I guess you can have as many options as you need.
Okay, that is our time. We're going to go to Mr. Kuzmierczak, and then we will take a short suspension. Mr. Kuzmierczak from sunny Windsor. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cousineau, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I just wanted to have a sort of a quick response so I can get through them. I just wanted to ask you, all procedures for procurement were followed. So this was done by the book. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. We have followed all the policy from Treasury Board, all the internal guidelines from GAC. So all the process was followed. Yep.
Thank you. You did an 88-page analysis of this decision on this property. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I couldn't speak about the amount of pages of that analysis, but there was an analysis.
A deep analysis was done. Is that correct?
Analysis, I couldn't qualify the analysis, but definitely there was analysis that actually met all the criteria in the process.
Perfect. You visited 21 properties. Is that correct? And the value of those properties ranged from $8 million to $21 million. Is that correct, roughly speaking? You looked at 21 properties.
Yes, we actually work with a real agents to actually visit 21 properties. Absolutely.
You selected the property that was on close to the lowest cost. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, it was among the lowest costs. Exactly.
You saved taxpayers roughly $3 million of renovations of the old property. Correct?
Mr. Chair, indeed, like the fact that we're actually purchasing a new residence will prevent the actual investment of the renovation that was required.
You're saving taxpayers 50% on monthly costs. Is that correct with the new property?
Mr. Chair, absolutely, that is correct. And I just want to clarify that it's cheaper because we will be tax exempt thanks to the Vienna Convention.
So you won't be paying taxes on this new property. You were paying taxes on the old one. So that's saving money for the taxpayer. Over the life cycle costs, you mentioned about $115,000 annual savings, which over, let's say, 50 years owning this building, that's going to be about $5 million in just monthly costs savings to Canadian taxpayers. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. It is $115,000, which is half of the expenditure we've done annually for the previous apartment.
Thank you. So over the life cycle, that right there is about $5 million saving for the Canadian taxpayer. Now, after selling the old apartment, the Canadian taxpayer is actually going to be about $4 million ahead in terms of costs on this. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. If we compare the sale of the current condo versus the next condo, we'll be presenting roughly $4 million savings.
Perfect. And now the new apartment is accessible, whereas the old apartment was not accessible. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, there's a lot of new things that are positive in this new condo, and accessibility is one of them.
Wonderful. And in addition to all of these things, there's a value add. You're going to actually be able to host meetings at this new apartment, and you host about 50 meetings per year, and you're going to be able to host that as this new apartment, which you were not able to do at the old apartment. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, this is correct.
Okay, so what we have here is we have a better apartment, we have an upgraded apartment, we have more functionality, it is cheaper, and it saves Canadians' taxpayers. The conservative plan costs more, less accessible, less functionality, less effective, which basically describes the Conservative Party in a nutshell right there. And so this is, to me, this is incroyable. And I look at the fact in my community, so you're talking about $1 trillion trade partnership between Canada and the United States. 1/3, it's $1 trillion partnership. 1/3 of that trade goes through my community. So I care about making sure that we have the best consul general, and we have the best folks in place, and we have the best resources in place. And the Conservatives are talking about downgrading the Canada-U.S. partnership and our ability to play hardball. And hardball is what we're doing, because it's $1 trillion investment. And I look at what the Liberal government has done to negotiate a NAFTA trade that was for our benefit, that helped our steel industry, that helped our auto industry. And you're darn right that we want to upgrade our resources there, not downgrade our resources, which is what the Conservatives have done. And it's exactly their playbook, what they did to the Canadian military as well when they were in government. They downgraded investment in our military. Now they want to downgrade investment in our most important trade relationship with our U.S. partnership. That's a shame. And so, again,
and that is our time, Mr. Kuzmierczuk. We are going to take a short break. Please be ready at 25 minutes to the hour, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cousineau, just before the break, you actually lied to committee. And you did it for partisan purposes. You did it so that Justin Trudeau and his buddy Tom Clark would look good.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We just had this
Your
conversation.
department.
It is a point of order.
Sorry, it's not. Can you continue, Mrs.
Yes.
Block?
Your
The
department.
language being used, Mr. Chair, the language is not respectful of our witness.
You do not have the floor, Mr. Longfield. You've been an MP long enough to know that if you wish to interrupt, you call a point of order.
You've been an MP long enough to know what a point of order is.
And you should perhaps follow committee rules. And if you can continue like that, I will not recognize you, Mr. Longfield. But I take your point, but that is not a valid point of order. Please allow Mrs. Block to continue, and I'm sure she'll get to her point.
Rarely do I cut to the chase as I just have done. But your department sent this committee a letter which stated that 50 events were held at the Consul General's residence over the past 2 years, not 50 events in 1 year. So that's 2 events, that's 1 event every 2 weeks. As a result of the information that you've given us, I would like for you to table with this committee a list of those events, together with the purpose of the events, the number of attendees, and now, because of this contrary information that you've provided for us today, I would like the dates of all those events included.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to clarify what's in the opening remarks that was provided was indeed 2 years. I might have misunderstood during the fast pace talking that was going on what was mentioned. So it is truly 2 years. And I'd like to add that as public service, we're here to represent the great work that we're doing. And I take exception on when we're being accused of being liars. We're there to be there for value for money and to do good stewardship and to provide Canadians what's best for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cousineau. I accept your explanation that you were caught off guard like the rest of us were in the midst of the rant prior to the break. Mr. Irek also accused the Conservatives of wanting to downsize, when in fact this is the argument that yourself and the officials have made as one of the reasons for why this is such an acceptable place for the Consul General to be moving to. So which is it? What's the official government line? Is it because it's a smaller residence and you want to downsize that you're pursuing this residence, or is it something else?
Mr. Chair,
point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it's not a point of order. He's not making a point of order.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's not a point of order.
The word is downgrade.
Colleagues, please, one person at a time. Allow Mr. Kuzmierczuk to do his point of order, and I will decide. Could you just start again, Mr. Kuzmierczuk?
Yes, respectfully, Mr. Chair, I used the word downgrade. That the Conservatives.
That is not a point of order. We will continue. Go ahead, Mrs. Block.
So can you just reiterate for us, is in fact one of the reasons that this is a more acceptable location that you have made is that it's a smaller residence than the one that the Consul General is currently residing in?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to go back to my opening remarks. We actually have made decision on multiple factors. One of them is the net present value that it was bringing. The second one was around like the meeting all the future needs, value for money for Canadians. And while we are downsizing, it was not the main factor.
All right, thank you very much. In the letter that we received from Ms. McCardle, she also cited that there were other issues raised about the suitability of the current residence. These issues included lack of proper division of family and representational spaces and restrictions on events that were imposed by the cooperative board. What are the rules for the new condo? Did you ensure that you would be allowed to bring in large groups of strangers for events at this exclusive condo building?
Mr. Chair, I welcome the question. As you can imagine, with the co-op model that exists, there was a lot of restriction that we had to face, which was very challenges. We do know that in the new location that we're going to go, there's going to be more flexibility, making us more agile for those representation.
So did you confirm if there were any rules in regards to the types of events that you hope to hold in the new residence?
Mr. Chair, I would respond to the current situation with the co-op and the restriction that we have, which would not be applied like the way it is with the current co-op environment we're in the new condo. So we are expecting more flexibility for sure.
Are there any rules that you are aware of?
Mr. Chair, I would actually turn to my colleague who have been working very closely on the purchase of the condo about the specific rules because I don't have those details.
And who would that be?
Thank you. Oh, that would be me. Thank you. We have taken into account the ability to perform the duties or the requirements of the program before purchasing the unit. I haven't read myself the condominium convention that exists at the building there, but I know that the unit was selected because it is possible and convenient to organize the events according to the program need.
It might state in that convention.
I'm not aware of any restriction that may exist in the new condo with regard to, typically there will be restrictions in terms of security and access, but other than that, I'm not aware of any other restriction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Atwin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought it was Mr. Jahari first, but I can certainly
go ahead, Mr. Jawari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a brief comment before I continue on the line of questioning. Colleagues, Canadians, we are here with a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that we hold any type of expenditure that we need better clarification accountable. It is fair to ask tough questions. It is fair to ask clarifying questions. It is fair to challenge the premises of the decision that was made by officials. But I strongly recommend for us to ensure that we carry the true meaning of what it means to be an MP, a member of parliament who represent Canadians, and stop labeling our officials who are working hard. And these officials may be working with other parties, hopefully not for a long time, but these officials need the respect because they are working very hard to represent Canada and Canada's interest. Thank you. So on Canada's interest, I want to go to, I believe, Mr. Mark Allen. Before I talked about I frame our conversation, three themes, imperative, I think we got it. I think our closing of the last round was around policies that were followed, values that were value for money. A lot of documents are going to come. We're going to have the opportunity to look at those calculation, valuation, and decide whether it is. But I really want to talk about the third theme, which was the importance. We've talked about the number of times, and we've gone to an angle that says, hey, look, you know what? Probably we could have done serving it out of somewhere else. Now, can you give me a sense of how big this mission is from a point of dollar value for trade? We're debating whether it's 2 meetings or whether it's 1 meeting per every 2 weeks. But how important are these? I hear $200 billion. I hear representing 6 or 7 jurisdictions. Can you break it down for us how important the work that we're doing in this area is?
Yes, this is one of 12 consulates general in the United States. This has a territory of 5 states: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Delaware, and Pennsylvania. And the $200 billion is the two-way trade between Canada and the entire consular territory. It's a very influential part of the United States, the Eastern Seaboard. We mentioned it's the economic capital of the United States and a center for global financial markets. So the GDP of that entire area is $6 trillion. And as we say, the two-way trade between Canada and the territory is in the neighborhood of $200 billion.
So for Canadians, I mean, the number we're talking about $200 billion of a $6 trillion opportunity. Can you give me what's the Canada's I think GDP in perspective?
Well, I can tell you that the entire trade between Canada and the United States is in the neighborhood of $3 billion each and every day. And that we can't, reference has also been made to our G7 collaborators. And I would say that it's not just because we're the United States' friend and neighbor that they trade with us. We're actually economic competitors of many of those G7 countries, UK, France, Germany. And so we need constantly to maintain these relationships, and our presence and our network is very much about being constantly in the orbit of U.S. decision makers in order to maintain our share of that important global trade. Thanks.
So with 20 seconds to go, I ask a final question. Do you think an investment of $9 million with a net saving of 7.4 over 50 years is justified to be able to facilitate, and I don't use any other word, facilitate the trade and the $200 billion opportunity in a $6 trillion market?
Mr. Joire has left you enough time for a yes or no question. Not even that.
It's Personal opinion, but it's about value for money, and I hope to have demonstrated the importance of this market to Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your Mr. Allen. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've heard it mentioned that it would seem to be a bit peculiar to rent an apartment for the Consul General, but I'd like to know more about rentals. In New York, Global Affairs owns property, but it also has rentals. It leases properties. So how does that work? Is that simply a stipend that is given to diplomats and they're told, handle it yourself? Or is it rather diplomats who send the cost of these rentals to Global Affairs? How does it work? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, my expertise is rather in the real estate area. I'm not sure about rentals. I'll ask Mr. Dubois to give us more information on this. This is a good question. Housing abroad is managed by a number of different models. There are different models to give housing to staff. You can either the government can own property and then allow staff to live in it. Or in some cases, for example, in the US, individuals are asked to enter into a private lease and then be reimbursed by the department on a monthly basis. We have 3 overall methods. We can own property, then we can house the diplomat there. We can rent it, or the diplomat can rent it directly. And which of these options is the most cost-effective for Canada? It really depends on individual factors. In the US and in some European locations, private rental prevails because the circumstances there are better. Then there are other places where there are security or other factors which lead to a strategy where we own the property because we invest in security updates and we want to ensure that we can take advantage of those investments. So there's no specific blanket answer. It really depends on the conditions in an individual country. In New York, in Manhattan, how many rental properties are we using? And what is the total cost of those rentals monthly? I will have to go get that information for you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious about accessibility, and it was mentioned as one of the justifications for the purchase of the new property that the old property didn't meet the requirements of the Accessible Canada Act. My question is whether the new property meets those requirements, specifically what the shortcomings at the old property were, and if the new property doesn't meet the requirements of the Accessible Canada Act, what the estimate is to ensure that the new property is brought up to spec and meets the requirements of the Act.
This is an excellent question, and indeed the current residence doesn't meet the Accessibility Act. I will turn to my colleague Robin Dubois that can speak about the new residence and information about accessibility.
You have a question, and you have several questions. One is about the shortcoming of the existing official residence, and there were 2 categories of shortcomings that were identified in that residence. One of them was associated with the unit per se. If I want to be more accurate, is the accessible bathroom were not available in the unit, and I know that there were also base building conditions that prevented full accessibility. So there are those issues are not found in the same way in the new residence, and now we can say that this new residence that we acquired is accessible.
Does the new residence meet the requirements of the Accessible Canada Act, since the Act was referenced in terms of the shortcomings of the old residence?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I want to circle back on Minister Melanie Joly's involvement in this latest Justin Trudeau scandal. we heard through you, Mr. Cousineau, that you notified her chief of staff sometime in June. You're going to give us the exact date. What I didn't hear is the actual date of the closing of the new unit. Presumably, real estate closes at the end of the month. Is it safe to say this occurred at the end of June of 2024?
Mr. Chair, if you bear with me, I'm just want to make sure that I have like the information right in front of my eyes. The transaction approval, the payment and the transaction was towards the end of June 2024. Yeah.
But Melanie Jolie's office was notified much earlier than the actual sale, correct?
Mr. Chair, as part of our process and communication, yes, we had communicated at the end.
And to your knowledge, you only communicated with the chief of staff. I'd like you to table the correspondence that you sent to the chief of staff. Will you do that, sir?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if there's correspondence.
Well, you pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way, we just purchased a $9 million condo on Billionaires Row. Is that what you did?
Mr. Chair,
surely
again,
there must be something that's official.
Mr. Chair, I want to reiterate, we follow our delegation authority, supported by expertise and a team.
How did you communicate, sir? It's a simple question.
Our team actually has been communicated with Minister's office.
How did you communicate? Snail mail, email, telephone call? What did you do?
Mr. Chair, I could confirm and verify how the communication was done with their
Fine. It's absolutely ridiculous that you can't tell me how you communicate with your own ministry. That's absolutely ludicrous. Now, I think Canadians want to know why there's been such a deafening silence from the minister herself, knowing that we've got a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, 9 years of Justin Trudeau's spendthrift and irresponsible government, and crickets from the minister with respect to a $9 million condo for Justin Trudeau's buddy, who once asked him, what kind of shampoo do you use? As ridiculous as it, look, why hasn't she communicated to the public about this particular purchase?
Mr. Chair, we follow delegation authority, and I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the minister. I think that question should be more appropriate for the minister herself. Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk about the property itself. It's listed. An elegant entry foyer with white Makuba stone floors, stunning powder room finished in jewel onyx, custom smoke gray floors, an Italian white Venato marble in one of the bathrooms, a freestanding copper soaking tub handcrafted by William Holland, custom bronze fixtures by Mr. Gurin. We talk about a kitchen equipped with a wet bar, Cristallo gold quartz-right countertops, custom handcrafted cabinetry, a full suite of Gaggenau appliances. Gaggenau, the most expensive appliance maker in the world, an oven, a Gaggenau oven costs $19,000. So I guess shopping at our local Leon's or the Brick wasn't an option for the Canadian taxpayers. But, I'm wondering why you had to have all of these features. I'm referencing your statement. When you talk about the old unit, last refurbished in '82, the apartment does not meet new building codes nor standards. So what I just described to you as luxurious pieces, are these GAC standards, or more frankly, are they Tom Clark's standards? Can you answer that question, sir?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just reiterate Mr. Clark didn't have any influence in the selection and approval of this new condo. The feature that we just described are not part of our what I would call space requirements. And that, we don't look at that kind of feature. We look at the value of the property, and we felt that the value proposition and the value for money was there for Canadians.
Well, the oven is $19,000. The refrigerator is $13,000. The coffee maker is $4,600. The freezer is $11,000. The dishwasher is $6,000. How on earth is that value for the Canadian taxpayer?
Mr. Chair, once
Just
again,
a very brief answer, please.
once again, Mr. Chair, that's not part of the space requirements that we do when we do the actual evaluation of a new property, and I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thanks. We're going to go now over to you, Ms. Atwin. Please go ahead, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to begin my questions this round by also, saying the way that we present ourselves as parliamentarians should be front of mind. Canadians are watching this. I think that the public servants that have come before us today to share what they know, they've been open, they've been transparent, they've been honest with us. So I really take offense to the characterization of anyone who's come before us today as not being as truthful as they possibly can. And I just think we need to be really careful again at how we conduct our meetings. It's been a bit of a trend here, unfortunately, that our public servants have kind of been raked over the coals. And as we know in the past, this has actually led to threats being made against them or, social media campaigns. And so I really would caution all of us to be careful that this doesn't happen again. So I do have a question. Mr. Cousineau, you mentioned about the consul serving 300,000 Canadians in the area. What kind of services do citizens actually receive at the residence?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. It's an excellent one. I can tell you that consul is one of our busiest missions that we have in the world. And I'll turn to my dear colleague, Mark Aylan, to respond on the operation.
Yeah, with respect to services that the consulate provides directly to citizens, the committee will be aware of a number of incidents that have happened in New York's territory over the last year. There was a tour bus that crashed in upstate New York involving Canadians. A plane went down. People will remember the explosion at the Rainbow Bridge. Last November. And when these things happen, it's very important that the consulate has very close ties with local authorities. And in this case, with the governor's office, for example, with respect to the explosion at the Rainbow Bridge. And those ties are as I said earlier, maintained and advanced through the work of the consulate, which includes events at the official residence.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I guess more generally, just kind of considering all the testimony we've heard today and yesterday previously. So for any of our witnesses, if you'd like to weigh in, have you personally dealt with any cases similar to this case where residence or other real property was bought to replace one that was being sold? Is this something you've experienced before?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have quite a complex infrastructure around the globe and 182 missions, 112 missions. So we do have regular transaction, hundreds of projects. I couldn't speak if there was any recent transactions similar to this one. I am looking to my colleague, Mr. Thibault.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, as Mr. Cousineau was saying, with the amount of properties that we have abroad, we have experience in transactions of either selling or purchasing or replacing assets. Would that be chanceries, official residences, or staff quarters? Of course, we don't replace official residences as often as staff quarters, but we do have experience over the past few years of those transactions.
And do you remember similar committee studies, or can you think of previous inquiries of this nature?
Call any study as of this one.
Okay. And just in general, again, as far as anything with regards to this purchase, to the decisions that were made, was all policy followed?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to reiterate that all the policies were followed. It was a smart acquisition, and it was well documented and exempt from any influence. Thank you.
And do you have any concerns at all about how this process unfolded, or anything that's transpired with regards to this conversation?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, I'm very proud of the work that's been done by our people, the recommendation that they provided, and the due diligence that they've been followed, providing a value for money for Canadians as we move forward with this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And just with my remaining couple of seconds here, I'd just like to ask, in general, again, I know you've been interrupted a bit. There's been some time, taken away from your responses. If there's anything at all you'd like to add, please do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
In 10 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Once again, I think this is a very smart investment. We're very proud of the work that's done and this new acquisition that we'll do. When we look at other countries such as Danesh, that's not even part of the G7. They are in Manhattan and they paid like $9 million. If we compare to the G7, I think we're well positioned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Cousineau. Mr. Genuis, back to you, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I think everything should be working on my end. I think one thing that's come clearly through the Liberal line here is that they believe that investing in Canada means investing in luxury for a few well-connected officials. This underlines that Liberals can't tell the difference between investing in Canada and investing in themselves. And this was very clear in Mr. Kuzmerichuk's comments. Of course, Conservatives recognize the importance of our presence in New York. We also recognize the cost of living crisis and that events can be held in various places. We don't need an infinite number of possible places to host events. And I want to drill down into this, the government's argument here that this is fundamentally about hosting. So the government of Canada purchased a glitzy $9 million residence on Billionaires Row with all kinds of incredibly luxurious features. It's much nicer than the kind of property that most Canadians or most New Yorkers would have. And the claim that the government's made is, well, this allows them to host events. Ironically, though, this glitzier property, much nicer place for the occupant, but has
just a point of order, Chair.
Less hosting space.
All right, let me interrupt you. That's a point of order, Mr. Genuis.
I'm just wondering if you could just check through the clerk if we're having any challenges with our interpretation. I just.
I'm hearing it okay. I'm hearing the French okay. Are you interpreter? Can you hear Mr. Genuis okay? Yep,
okay.
We're fine.
Perfect. I apologize for the interruption.
Sorry, Mr. Genuis. Go ahead.
No problem. So, in terms of potential hosting in this new location, do you have a copy of the condo rules associated with hosting events in the new location?
Mr. Chair, once again, when it comes to the new location that we have purchased, it is more efficient and cost-effective, as we said.
That's not
in terms
of my question, sir. Do you have the condo rules?
Mr. Chair, in terms of the condo and the condo rules, we would get. I would have to get back to you. I don't have that information with me right now.
Okay, so the primary justification you've used is that you want to be hosting events in the new location. You think it's more appropriate for hosting them. There are rules associated with hosting events. You must surely know what those rules are in order to make the case that this is a more appropriate or preferential location in some way, or that you can host events at all in the new location. And yet you don't know what those rules are. Is that correct?
We're actually purchasing as a more suitable and private setting for high-level things that it was mentioned.
Sir,
when it comes to
condo rules.
Yeah, when it comes to rules, I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Dubois, that can speak to the details of those rules.
Does anybody have the condo rules?
Thank you for the question. Yes, somebody has the condo rules, but I don't have them with me. I know that there are two options for the head of mission there in that building. It's basically he can use his own unit to entertain for smaller, more personal events. But there's also.
Sir, do you have the specific condo rules? Does somebody in the government of Canada have those specific condo rules? You understand how important this is, right? The whole justification for this luxury condo is we can host events. There are rules that govern the building in terms of what events can be hosted. So somebody in the government of Canada should have those rules and should be able to provide those quickly to this committee. Can you undertake to ensure that we are able to see those rules within, say, 48 hours?
I would. I'm totally. I know those rules exist, and I know somebody has it. I can undertake to go back and find them. I would rather have a longer period of time to deliver if the chair agrees with me.
Okay. Well, we need to have them prior to next week's meeting with Mr. Clark. So will you get them to us by Monday at noon?
Yeah, I can come back and inquire and see if I can get them to the committee by Monday.
But by Monday at noon, they'll need to be translated as well.
I'm sorry, was that on? Did you mention the translation? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I assume the existing.
Oh, yeah.
I assume this is part of my time.
Would you maybe advise the clerk end of the day or tomorrow morning about an update on when you'll be able to provide those rules to us, and then we'll get back to the committee then.
Thank you for the flexibility, Mr. Chair, because the document must be only in one official language.
Oh, I know, but just get back to the clerk today or us tomorrow or the clerk tomorrow morning about how long or when you'll be able to deliver that to us so we can get it translated.
Thank you.
You've got a short bit of time left, Mr. Genos.
Yeah. Just a follow-up question on that. Can those existing rules be changed by a simple majority of people in the building? How can those rules be changed? And what are the chances that the hosting rules would change once we've moved in?
Well, there's always an annual meeting with the building condo owner, and the rules can certainly be amended. But
so you don't know the rules, and the rules, even if they are more favorable, they can be changed by a vote of those in the building. So the whole justification for this luxury condo is hosting events. And you can't tell me the rules for hosting events, and those rules are subject to change by a vote of those in the building, and allegedly, so many of our potential investments depend on the ability to hold events in the private home of the Consul General. Like, do you see the obvious absurdity of this, sir? How your lack of knowledge of those rules doesn't square with the claims that have been made today?
That I think Mr. Gibault has clearly explained that we know those rules, like that's part of what the team is looking at, and we will be pleased to get back to you in terms of when we could provide those rules. And I think the question was about can those rules be changed? Yes, they can be changed. That's typical in a condo, and they will have their annual meeting to look at that.
You don't have the rules to present to us today, so we'll look forward to looking at them in the future, I suppose.
Thanks, Mr. Genuis. We're going over back to the West Coast. Mr. Baines, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, it's funny being hung up on just the events. I think we should go back to the importance. That isn't the whole justification of these, being situated in an area where, diplomatic relations can occur in a favorable manner. And I'll go back to maybe Mr. Allen or Mr. McCubbing on this. We are talking about, I think you mentioned, we are competing. This is a financial sector, the sort of a headquarters of, even the world when it comes to, global trade and some of these missions. If you look at, the importance of being situated, if we even look at Vancouver, for example, many of the consul offices, many of the consul residences are located in and around areas where there's access to, for example, I know you mentioned critical minerals and how important that strategy is for Canada. We have over 1,500 mining headquarters located in Vancouver area, and even when my office specifically, if you look at the Minister's Regional's office and the proximity to access to consul generals and organizing and setting up meetings and being able to go, I had the opportunity to welcome consul generals from not only the United States but Chile to the largest commercial fishing harbor in Canada, which is located in Steveston Village in my city of Richmond, British Columbia. And it's a place where over 100 million pounds of seafood is offloaded annually which directly results in over $200 million of revenue to the region. And those things are important to many of these consul offices to consider. So maybe, speak a little bit more about that. And we recently had the Australian representatives visit the Seaspan shipyard, where we just announced and launched the largest oceanographic vessel that's been built recently. We have a joint supply ship that's going to be ready to announce later this fall. So there's a lot going on where many of our science, our innovation, Canadian technology, things that we have to offer and share need to be not only, translated through meetings, but the proximity of people being in an area that where we can have consecutive meetings, back-to-back meetings, and not having to travel lengths of time. So, New York City is not the easiest place to get around. So maybe you can speak to all of those, things that matter. We talked about the trillions that are at our stake here, and we need that money. We need that money to provide the services and supports that Canadians need on a regular basis here. The people that even are the most vulnerable. So maybe speak to the importance of the proximity of the location.
Sure. I'd be pleased to. As I think we've said earlier, there's an incredible concentration in New York City of people, of capital, of institutions. It's a very large city. It can be difficult to navigate, and so that centrality is, I think, incredibly important for us as well as our like-minded, who as I say, are also our economic competitors. When we organize events, one of the success factors is the uptake on attendance of how many people do we invite and how many people actually attend, and when events are central, when they're held at a residence, the ratio of uptake is higher among the people whose help we need to advance our interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I hope to get an answer to the following question. If not, I hope to get the answer in writing. Prior to 2022, you needed authorization for purchases of over $4 million. But since 2022, that limit was raised to $10 million. So let's take the 5-year period between 2017 and 2022. How often did GAC have to ask for this type of authorization to purchase or build a residence? Thank you, Chair. I will turn to my colleague, Shirley Carruthers, who is responsible for finances.
I can tell you is that between 2016 and 2021, the department actually had to go to Treasury Board Secretariat a total of 44 times in order to get transaction authorities to go forward with different transactions. So whether that be to enter into a lease transaction and or to purchase a building. Thank you.
OK. Et est-ce que ce nombre de fois...
And those times, those 44 times, was that greater than what was being done previously, let's say between 2011 and 2016? Or is it approximately equivalent? How does it compare?
I'm sorry, but I don't have that information with me, and I was unable to locate that information prior to coming to this committee. However, I can go back to the department and see if I can locate that information.
Mr. Bachrach, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in Global Affairs' evaluation of risk surrounding this transaction, and perhaps our witnesses could describe, what Global Affairs saw as the greatest risk involved in this particular transaction, the purchase of the new apartment, and more generally, what the various risks that were evaluated as part of the decision-making process were.
Thank you very much for this question. Indeed, risk is an important element that we look as we look at our process and what's included in our framework, as I said before. When it comes to risk and part of the details of those risks, I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Dubois, to talk about those.
Thank you. The business case that we build for those purchases is cover multiple angles, and one of them is absolutely the risks associated with the transaction. And there are different there's different risk associated with those transactions. Of course, the risk associated with the timing of it. There's also risk with the assumption that we make when we do the financial evaluation. As the transaction progress, we get more known information, more than estimation, so that makes it a bit more secure. There's also the assessment of the asset condition that is a risk when we do this kind of transaction. There's a financial risk with currency fluctuation as well, because we're paying in U.S. dollars, so we want to take that into consideration. There's market availability, and so that would be part of the of all of the risks that are part of the option analysis and the business case that we've put together.
Is the risk around the future value of the real estate? I know in this particular building and in Steinway Tower in particular, we've seen really significant decreases in the asking price for units. More than 20% of the units in the building have never sold. The vacancy rate is estimated to be around 50%, and the project's lender has written off debt due to not being able to secure returns. I'm just wondering what the evaluation of risk when it comes to the future value of the property was in the opinion of Global Affairs.
I'm afraid there hasn't been time left over for an answer, but Mr. Bachrach, you'll have one more round after this, so perhaps we can get to it then. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please, for 5.
Okay, my question is for the Deputy Consul General, Mr. McCubing. You signed off on the purchase of this property on Billionaires Row for Justin Trudeau's media buddy, Tom Clark. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I was delegated authority from the Property Bureau and headquarters to provide the wet signature on the transaction.
Are you aware if in relation to this transaction and its approval and your subsequent signature, if there was any correspondence with the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, or the Minister for Global Affairs office?
I'm not aware of any communication between any of those agencies.
Okay.
And our office.
So there was no you weren't given any visibility on communications with the Minister's Chief of Staff in the form of a heads up on this?
No, I was not involved with that communication.
How did you know that you were to sign it?
I was provided an email with a delegated letter authorizing me to sign the contract.
And who was the email from?
It was from my colleagues in the Property Bureau, the Director General in charge of real property.
Okay. Was Mr. Clark informed of that a decision had been taken to pivot from a renovation to a property purchase?
Mr. Clark was aware that there was a process ongoing to find a new official residence.
Did Mr. Clark ever opine, or are you aware of him ever offering any opinion on the suitability of the residence that's to be disposed of?
Sorry, pardon me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark never opined to me about the disposal of the current residence.
So, and further to my question, did he ever speak about the suitability or his comfort at the the residence that's being sold?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Clark never shared with me his thoughts on the suitability of the current residence.
But you weren't. Are you aware of him expressing any opinion on it?
I am not personally aware of Mr. Clark having shared any opinion on the current residence.
And was he read in on any of the options for the now purchased residence, or during that process?
No, Mr. Clark was not aware of any of the options and was not part of the process to look at any of the options.
Are you familiar with the space that's shared by your office and the ambassador to the United Nations?
Yes, I'm familiar with the Chancery building and the shared space.
Is it your opinion that that's a suitable place to hold meetings with trade officials and dignitaries?
We have, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we've host many different types of meetings at the shared space at the Chancery.
What's the highest level of dignitary or the highest individual in the order of precedence who has been party to a meeting in that space?
We have had meetings with ministers, not part of the consulate work, but the Prime Minister has had meetings in this office.
Okay. Have you had any ambassadors there?
Not on the Consulate General side, so I couldn't speak to that, but I understand on the United Nations side.
Are you aware in the shared space of there being any ambassadors participating in meetings there?
In the shared space, I understand that ambassadors on the United Nations side participate in meetings.
Yeah, so I just find it very interesting, about the value, and we're going to run short on time here, but I just really like to know about the added value that Canadians who are working who are working in Victoria by the Sea, Prince Edward Island, or in Victoria, British Columbia, or in Windsor or Toronto, or in Sudbury or Sault Ste. Marie, who are struggling to pay their bills. What added value do they get for this? When we have a meeting space, we're told that we need this new $9 million residence for Tom Clark, Justin Trudeau's buddy on Billionaire Row, because the meeting space was insufficient. But the space that you have has hosted prime ministers, ambassadors, and all order of people. What's the added value for Canadians who can't pay their rent, and for the 1 in 4 Canadians who are going to food banks?
I'm afraid there's no time for a response. Mr. Longfield, we'll go over to you, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for providing such detailed information to us and for helping us with our responsibilities as members of Parliament. As a member of Parliament, I've used a few councillor offices in Ottawa, and many Canadians won't know the purpose of councillor offices, and I could speak to what may be part of my experience with councillor offices. And then maybe Mr. Allen can help fill in on how this could benefit Canadians. Previous to being a member of Parliament, I was managing director of a United Kingdom company in Canada. And when I was elected, I went to the UK Council to meet with him at the residence with other MPs to talk about the trade relationship we have between the UK and Canada, one of our most important trading partners. And I've been to the councillor office for the Netherlands, where they have expertise in clean technology, and Guelph is quite involved with climate change initiatives, clean technology companies. And to know that we have a route to the Netherlands through Ottawa, through the councillor office that's on the ground here. I'm also picturing the American elected officials using councillor offices in the same way to have a route into potential trade partners for their constituents. Maybe, Mr. Allen, could you talk about how elected officials in the United States might benefit from this New York location, And given the NAFTA negotiations that we've just gone through and will be going through again soon, changes in government, changes in political climate, trying to add to business stability by face-to-face communications, could you maybe comment on the significant strategic importance of having on-the-ground counselor services for elected officials to use?
Absolutely. So our network of missions abroad really represent the totality of Canadian interests in each of the cities and regions where they're located. So we've talked about the trade and investment side of that, the public affairs side of that, the consular services side of that. But I think also importantly, they build our brand around the world and show. And you've used examples like clean tech, which also apply to Canada. I mentioned critical minerals, and so I think we're lucky as a country to have a very positive brand abroad, but it takes work, as I say, to continue to promote that. So in representing the totality of our interests, they also provide an important sort of place, a meeting place for international interlocutors from the commercial world, as we say, from institutions. And really, I think there, despite the networked world that we are increasingly living in, there's absolutely no substitute for that face-to-face communication, which is really the business of diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, social media is what it is. I mean, email communications, even me attending not in person, creates a distance between me and the people that we're talking to. It's second best to face-to-face. I'm looking at Canada's exports of goods and services. Our exports increased 4.4% in June. Imports rose 1.8% in June. So our balance of trade did quite well in June, and I think we've shown over the past several months an increase in our exports to international partners. When I'm working with the small businesses in Guelph, last week I was at a wheelchair manufacturer in Guelph, and I said, have you considered our trade services and use Canada Business app so that you could get in touch with our trade services, because you could export these goods, not just serving our local and Canadian community, but you've got world-class products here. So small businesses need those connections either through the Canada Business app, but the face-to-face that our offices can provide. Could you maybe comment on any of the face-to-face opportunities that you've witnessed at this office in New York?
Absolutely. So our trade commissioner service, who are based in our overseas platform, including in New York, are directly responsible for opening doors on behalf of Canadian exporters and providing critical market intelligence to help them really seal deals in economies all around the world, and including in New York. I also mentioned the investment attraction kind of raison d'être.
I apologize, Mr. Allen, but I did not leave you much time to answer. But
thank you, Mr.
You're
Allen.
more than
Thank you,
welcome to perhaps finish it in writing to committee. I think it'd be appreciated. Mrs. Vignola, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cousineau, generally, we receive remarks in written form. This morning, unless I had a problem with my iPhone, which of course is a possibility, I did not receive the comments. Could we please get your comments in written form? Mr. Speaker, I do think we sent my remarks to the committee, so I hope that you will be receiving these remarks shortly. That's great news. Thank you.
Pardon?
We did receive them at the very last minute.
Ah, okay. Good. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Inaudible for the interpreter. Mr. Genus discussed the co-op rules. Is the Government of Canada part of the board that makes decisions about the co-op in the Steinway? yes, Canada is represented because we now have presence in that building. Thank you. That's it for now.
Thank you, Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up where I left off in the last round with the question around risk associated with the future value of the property and whether Global Affairs took note of some of the challenges the developers had selling units in the associated building that the annex is attached to, and just what their evaluation was of risk associated with future valuation of the property.
Thank you very much for the questions. As mentioned in the beginning, we got a professional appraisal on this from PSPC, which is part of the process. And also we have leveraged the private sector real agent that have been actually helping us to identify what the market was all about and the current state of that market on which the price was established. So we believe that with these two elements, we have mitigated the risk as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay. Was the risk assessed as being low in terms of future value of the property? I understand that information is in the very lengthy appraisal that the committee's been provided with. But in brief, does Global Affairs feel that, from an investment perspective, that this is a solid investment that's going to appreciate over time, or are there risks that Canadians should be concerned about?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. Given the value money we're looking for, that's a really important one, and I'll turn to Mr. Dubois to respond to the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. One of the risks is always associated with the financials, and that one of the variables that we have identified in the business process in the development of the business case does not materialize the way we anticipated that it would be. Our cost estimators are really prudent in not assuming that the market appreciation would be too high on that unit. But the facts that we have are two things. Is we know that on the old properties that we're selling, the market has given us a significant return on investment over the years, about 10% or more. And we anticipate that in the long run, the Manhattan market will give us a good investment moving forward, and that's supported by our real estate broker opinions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bachrach. We'll finish up with Mr. Brock and then Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Thank you. I have a number of odds and end questions, some loose ends based on what we've discussed over the last almost 3 hours. I want to clarify, very early on in the first hour, my colleague, Mr. Barrett, had asked for details and tabling of any and all correspondence in relation to the sale and the acquisition of both condos. I want to specifically ask for any, and I appreciate that you said it a number of times, that Mr. Clark did not influence the decision to sell and the decision to purchase. But we still want any and all correspondence between Tom Clark and Global Affairs in relation to both properties. Will you table that, sir?
Mr. Chair, as mentioned, I will be pleased to look into it and see what's available and get back to this table.
Okay. Now, in relation to the 57th Street property, it was on the market for 235 days. Just shy of 8 months. It sold for $6.63 million. Did you pay full listing price, or did you negotiate the price down to $6.63?
Mr. Chair, always looking for value for money. Once again, I will turn to Robin to talk about the process of the negotiation on this one, which has been done, as I mentioned, with the real
I just want the question answered. I don't need an explanation.
Yeah.
Did you pay full listing, or did you negotiate?
There was a negotiation that took place, and we paid less than the listed price.
How much less?
I think it's in the document that was shared with you. It's $6.5 million US.
Right, but how much from the listing price to the selling price? What was the difference?
It was listed at I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 6.89 million.
6.89, and you bought for 6.63.
6.5. 6.5 million we paid.
Okay, so
US.
roughly what, $400,000?
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to the renovation costs on Park Avenue, how many bids did you receive from Global Affairs?
The renovation was assessed by our quantity surveyors, that are the professionals that basically assess the work that needs to be done based on plans done by architects. And we never went to market for those renovations because we worked with those numbers.
Why wouldn't you go to market to get the best value?
Is when we got the information that it was up now to 2.6 million, we wanted to change the approach and look at all of the options.
Well, that's based on your internal numbers, though. Why would you not go market to see whether or not it would be a more feasible option by trying to find the best renovation cost possible? Again, to save the taxpayer further money. Why wasn't that an option?
Well, the quantity surveyor are very good at assessing the cost of a project. So when we saw that the costs were escalating,
is that what you do for all your official residences in terms of renovation costs?
We do.
You don't look for best value.
We look for best value. We use quantity surveyors first to get an appreciation of how much money it's going to cost.
Okay, let's move on. You talked about that it was not, the old property was not accessible. Can you explain, and I think you did, that one of the washrooms had to be accessible? I truly understand that. Those are Canadian codes. But what was done specifically with the new property to make that accessible?
Well, I understand that the floor plan was looked at, and then it was determined that the options exist there for an accessible bathroom to be.
Okay, and that's being installed as we speak, because Mr. Clark is not in that residence right now, correct?
No, he's not there, and I don't think we need to renovate. I think that the bathroom is readily available and accessible as it is.
Okay, so you don't need to put any additional devices on the walls to make it even more accessible. It's just the ability to use a wheelchair to get into the washroom. Is that what you mean by accessible?
That's, yes.
The width of the door was more accessible at the new location versus the old location?
Yes,
and you couldn't renovate the existing entranceway to a washroom. There was like 7 washrooms in the old location. You couldn't just tear out the door and make it accessible. Was that discussed?
Sorry, we're talking about the
old property,
Chancery.
Park Avenue.
Well, that was part of the renovation projects that we looked at. It was to make it accessible.
Okay, and you also mentioned that,
Real brief,
and I had
Mr.
asked you questions about property taxes, monthly property taxes, and I explained to you that you are lying to Canadians when you say the new property has less carrying costs than the old, and I pointed that out to you. But then I also heard, in reference to a Liberal colleague asking you questions, that you are tax exempt pursuant to the Vienna Convention. Can you explain that, please?
We're out of time, but can you provide a very brief answer?
Absolutely, and very quickly, the new property is definitely cheaper because of that. We will be tax exempt on the new condo because of that Vienna Convention, absolutely.
Mr. Kismarchuk, please. Sorry,
Chair,
there we go. There we go, we can hear you now.
Chair, just a quick point of order.
Yeah, hold on one moment, Mr. Kismarchuk. Yes, Mr. Genos?
Thank you, Chair. Just I want to, at the end of my first round, I asked a number of specific questions, which you said the witness can follow up on in writing. I don't know that that was clarified, but I did just want to clarify, since we're towards the end here, that I would like a response in writing to my questions regarding various transfer taxes, mansion tax, etc., whether they apply and what the amounts would be. So just want to clarify that I do want the response in writing to that to be provided to the committee as you had suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genos. Mr. Kismarchuk, starting clock, please go ahead, sir. Sorry, we cannot hear you, sir. I'm afraid we still have no volume, Mr. Kuzmierczak. Majid. Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Through now? Okay,
Perfect. Go ahead, sir. And your time is up. Yeah, go ahead, please. We'll start at 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cousineau, I wanted to ask you how long you have been in the federal public service for.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think my gray hair reflects that I've been in the public service for 30 years.
For 30 years. So pretty much your entire adult life you've been in the federal public service serving this country. Is that correct, sir?
Give or take, yes, absolutely.
Sir, I wanted to say thank you for your service to this country. And I wanted to say thank you to all the public servants that serve our country with commitment and dedication and integrity and grace. And I say that, sir, because I did not appreciate some of the comments by my conservative colleagues that impugn your integrity. And I wanted to just simply go on record and to say that I thought that some of the comments by my conservative colleagues were beneath this committee. They were disrespectful and they were undignified. And I wanted to tell you, sir, I appreciate your decades of service to this country. And I thank you for that. You mentioned that this process was free of any political involvement. All procedures for procurement were followed by the book. You said that this process was well documented. Indeed, as I understand it, 88-page analysis was made on this decision. All the angles were looked at to make sure that Canadians got the best value for money. You used the word diligent. Visited 21 properties, were visited and looked at. Value anywhere between $8 million and $21 million. Made sure that Canadians, when we did make that decision, it was on the lower end of that scale, close to the lowest, if not the lowest end in terms of the cost. You used the word smart for this investment, and indeed, saving taxpayers $3 million of renovations for the old property, saving taxpayers 50% in monthly costs, 50% in monthly costs, saving taxpayers in this, actually getting a return on investment of that property, because the old property, you'll be able to sell it for more money. You'll actually put $4 million back in the bank of Canadian taxpayers. Smart. The new apartment is also more accessible than the old apartment, and it is more functional. There's a value add. You're going to be able to host more meetings, important meetings in that space. Meetings that are incredibly vital, especially to border communities like mine. $1 trillion of trade, a third of that goes through my border in Windsor-Tecumseh. 90%, sir, of what we manufacture is exported to the United States. 90% of what we grow, the farmers grow in my community, gets exported to the United States. And so I value the vital mission of the head of mission and the consulate in New York. It's an important part of the prosperity. The work that you do is important to the prosperity of my community and border communities like ours in Windsor-Tecumseh. And so I just wanted to say thank you, sir, for your service, for your decades of service to this country. I thank you for your integrity. I thank you for coming here, answering our questions, providing us an insight into how the real property procurement process is managed. I thank you for the good work, for the smart investment. I do wish you good luck in the next round of negotiations with our American friends and partners when we do renegotiate important trade agreements like NAFTA. We know how important it is in Windsor-Tecumseh. We know that it's set the table for $50 billion of investment in manufacturing in southwestern Ontario, $50 billion. We were able to revive manufacturing in southwestern Ontario
billions invested in Windsor, the battery plant, billions in St. Thomas, billions in Alliston, billions in across the board. And that was because of the good work that we were able to do, in large part because of our trade missions. Complete revitalization, revival of the manufacturing and automotive sector in southwestern Ontario. The work that you do, sir, is important. It's vital. We appreciate it. We want to make sure that you have all the resources that you need to compete and to be able to deliver for Canadians not only good value, good jobs, good investments. And I thank you, sir, for being here today.
Almost perfect timing, Mr. Kuzmierczuk. Thanks very much. Witnesses, just real quickly, we passed a motion in this committee that any documents requested, unless a date is set, are required within 21 days, calendar days. So I appreciate if you could follow that. I just have a couple quick questions, if you do not mind. The issue of the accessibility has come up several times, and I know it came in the notes as one of the justifications to purchase a new apartment. It also came up commentary of several hundred buildings we own or residences we own around the world. Would you provide back in writing within 21 days how many other offices or residences are being sold or renovated because of the accessibility rules that you've stated as justification for the New York purchase? And Ms. Carruthers, you didn't get much chance to talk today, so I'm going to give you an opportunity. In the vote 5 from last year's or this year's main estimates, there was $182.5 million for capital. Was the purchase for this property in that 182? So was it part of the SUPE or the main estimates?
For the question, Mr. Chair, in part of our $182 million in budget in Vote 5, we would have our regular budget, which would consist of about $69 million. That funding would be allocated to our real property colleagues, and as part of our
but was there specific? Was it part of, because you have to justify that as your Treasury Board submission? Was there a specific set aside for the New York purchase?
Yeah,
is what I'm asking.
Yeah. The funding for the New York purchase would have been part of that funding, correct?
Perfect. And the sale, will that go back into general revenues and then requested be repurposed for other purposes?
That's correct. When the residence is sold, that funding will go back into the fiscal framework, and our department will have the opportunity to access that funding through the main estimates.
Is there intent to access that through the next SUPs?
We currently have about $215 million that's available within our proceeds of sale within the fiscal framework. And so once the funding that we currently have in the fiscal framework is actually depleted, then of course we would go back in and request for further funding.
For the last or this year's mains, would you be able to provide to the committee then? Like you mentioned that there was a request, so a Treasury Board submission for the money for the New York purchase. Would you be able to provide to us the other submissions that make up that $182.5 million from the Vote 5?
What we would be able to do perhaps is to provide to you our departmental plans that would list how we are projecting to spend
I've read
that
the
funding.
departmental plans. There's not the information in there. Can you provide for the Vote 5 the justification that you would have presented to the Treasury Board?
We didn't provide a specific justification to the Treasury Board for that funding.
Just a random lump sum?
Well, it would be part of our overall planning in terms of at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Why don't we settle on any of the documents you might have or any of the numbers you have to justify the 182.5?
We can certainly do that.
I appreciate that. And and just one last request. So we were asking, I'm sure you watched yesterday's meeting, we were asking for the appraisal and we got bogged down. Could you let us know, perhaps in writing, how many people have access to that appraisal within and also outside of the government as well? Certainly. If real estate agents, because PSBC mentioned real estate agents and a few other may have access to that appraisal. I'd just like to figure out who has it. Ms. Block?
Just real quickly, Chair, I just want to ensure, because of some of the conversation that went on after I asked for the tabling with the committee, the list of the events together with the purpose of the events, the number of attendees, and the dates, if that was agreed to.
I thought I saw nods when it was requested. We're
Okay.
clear what we're looking for?
Information that we could
Fantastic.
provide in the
Thank
period that you've asked.
Thank you.
Witnesses here today, thank you very much. Mr. McCubbing from New York, thanks very much for joining us. We are adjourned. We'll see everyone.